Welcome back to Where in the World, where we have real conversations with young professionals about life and career, all while attempting to guess where in the world they are. Today, we're doing things a little differently. If you know me personally, have followed my journey, or watched any of these shows, then you know mental health is a deeply personal topic for me. I talk about it a lot. When I created Where in the World, one of my core missions was to give people permission to dig down deep into their feelings and let them know that it's totally okay to feel anxious, depressed, frustrated, afraid, excited, joyful, and happy along your career journey. All of those feelings are valid for you and your experience. Something something you'll hear often in the workplace is bring your full self to work. But what people don't say out loud is accept all the trauma. Leave that part at home. Today, you have permission to bring your full self into this conversation, trauma and all. We're going to talk about our feelings, and I have a special guest to help us out. I have a special guest to help us sort it all out today. Dr. Zhabina Bhasin, affectionately known as Dr. Z by many, is a South Asian American child and adolescent psychiatrist and a Cornell-educated diversity and inclusion expert. She's also a mental health and emotional wellness expert and the founder of In KidZ, an ed tech company. Dr. Z's mission is simple: to educate children and families about different cultures and celebrations with the ultimate goal of making inclusion a natural part of everyday family life. Being a mother herself, she is dedicated to transforming the world through play while promoting diversity and celebrating our differences. Welcome to the show, Dr. Z.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me and bringing this topic up today with all of your following, and also how important it is, especially within your career.
Absolutely. Um, if you're watching and listening at home, pause for a moment and acknowledge your inner child. So, we're going to bring our inner child into the conversation. I'm curious, Dr. Z, do you have any tips for how we can acknowledge our inner child?
One and foremost, I would love to ask everyone a question, and take it into yourselves. How many of you actually play? And I'm not talking about playing with toys, or if you're a mom or dad or a grandparent, and you're going to sit down and play with your kids. How do you play? Like, how do you bring that inner child in? You know, my kids love to play video games. I love to watch movies with them. That's my play with them. Or I sit and I do drawings with my daughter because we're really creative in our family, or make things. She likes to go get her nails done. That's play for us. We get to go play and go get her nails done. But that's play. What do you do to do play? So, one of the tips I have is play. Go out and do fun things. Go and do joyful, fun play things. Maybe go back to your childhood. Not really be a gamer and video gamer. That's not what I'm talking about when it comes to play. I mean, having a joyful moment and playing creatively, tapping into that, even a musical instrument, singing some songs, those kinds of things. A few other tips that I would have is spend time in nature. That really, I don't know if all of us remember, we all like to play outside. There was a generation of us that did. Then there's a generation that didn't. But now I think nature is something we all need to go to. Take a walk in the grass. Go take a walk just on the sidewalk and take a minute and listen to the birds. That's also a place where you can remember your inner feelings. Hey, we all watched Snow White. She listened to the bird. I'm not saying that's the movie to go off of, but listening to the birds is a place. There's also a place of, as an adult or a young youth or a young adult, is really taking that self time for yourself and compassion for yourself. That is one way to go back and look at your inner child. Journaling is a really good. As we get older, quiet space of meditation. That is so important when it comes down to finding your inner child as well. Because I think a lot of us don't realize our inner child also is part of us till we are older adults too. We don't let go of things. And if we want to focus on those, we have to actually remember what they were so we can focus on fixing them. Allow yourself to feel. There's nothing wrong with being saying, oh, why are you acting like a kid? Act like a kid. It's okay. Set aside time for yourself. That's really important to focus on who you are as a person, but also going back to your inner child. And I think one of the big things you said was just be joyful, enjoy small pleasures, eat ice cream, go and make some cookies. Be joyful. That would be one of the biggest things that I would really recommend, like you said earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember times in my life where I can remember a specific time in my life where I didn't know what actually made me happy or how to be joyful or where to find joy. It was very difficult for me. I was in a tough, dark space. Um, but as I started to do more journaling, as I started to spend more time in nature, as I started to eat more ice cream, I began to tap into the part of me that I felt like was maybe lost, the
Right.
humor, the freedom, the really ability to kind of let down my hair and not take myself so seriously. I think as we get further into our careers, there's so much pressure to be successful. There's so much pressure
Mhm.
because so much is riding on our job, the roof over our heads, the foods that we eat, right? Like we depend on our job so much for just our quality of life that it can become a kind of a stressful journey of working and saying I'll play later and then never actually
So
playing later, right?
right. So okay, you said something very specific. You said
Yeah.
so much of this is riding on our life, our job, our getting it done, our lifestyle we want to create, the successes. But to do all this, if you're constantly stressed out and you're not enjoying the part of your life that you need to, you're never going to complete that goal or that vision or that victory you want, because you're going at a pace that emotionally, physically, and mentally are going to not be successful. So one of the things that we have to remember, and we're told this as children and we don't take this into adulthood, is take some time and take a break. What's the point of education when we're in school if we don't have recess? Because we're not mentally giving ourselves a break. We're not giving that physical output that we need. We're not giving that mental output that we need. To do success, you have to have play and you have to have breaks. And those breaks aren't what I'm saying, like, oh, let me just give myself 5 minutes and get right back into it. No. And again, this has been a societal consistently telling us keep going, keep going, keep going. And I'll tell you one thing, this is actually a modern day American thing. If you look at the countries globally, they don't do that. In India and lots of Southeast Asian countries, they don't start their day till 9 o'clock or maybe even 10 o'clock. They go straight through lunch and then they take a break at 2 and don't come back till 4. They have consistent long hours of days. You see more healthy people. You don't see more levels of toxicity in their families. You actually see a place of enjoyment and family time. So that change of path has to happen within us first.
And as you mentioned that, it reminds me of a trip that I took several years ago when I was still an undergrad to Costa Rica. I went
Mhm.
there for a few months. I lived with the host family. My host family spoke no English, so it was constant. We were always in translation, and I remember during kind of my first weeks there. I went to school, so I was going to school. I was studying social work, and I was also studying Spanish at the time, in Costa Rica at a school. And I remember there was a break in the middle of the day. We would take these. It would be two, maybe even longer, like breaks
Mhm.
in the middle of the day. And I remember my host mom calling up the school in tears, and they told me, they're like, your host mom is calling and she's in tears. And I'm like, why? They're like, because you didn't come home for break. And I was so confused because I was like, we don't do that where
Right.
I'm from. Like we don't take breaks, and it's expected for you to
Mhm.
go home, for you to have a meal with your family, for you to rest and then continue your day. And so this topic of rest is so so important. And I would say if you're in a space where you're saying to yourself, I'm tired. And you hear yourself saying that all the I'm tired. I need a break. I need rest. Listen to that voice because it's pointing to something that you are needing in your life. And when you take action on it, your life will change. And I can say that because that was what was true for me. Um, okay, so I want to pause here and I just want to let people know that if you're used to watching this show, typically we're both here with different backgrounds and we take turn guessing where the other person is in between questions. We're doing things a little bit different today. We're going to save the big reveal until the end. We're just going to continue to have this conversation about mental health and we're going to go a little bit deeper into the conversation. So, Dr. Z, can you just give our audience an idea of who you are? We want to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
I am born and raised in one of the states in the US. I guess I can't say a lot right now. But what I wanted to say was, I was born in an immigrant family, and I was born to two immigrant, parents from South Asia who came and had their university and college here in the U.S. and they lived the middle class life. They gave me and my brothers everything impossible they could, but we also came from a very cultured family. There was a source of culture in our household. Boys did this, girls did that. So my journey was to become a physician, and my journey took me to South Asia to go into medical school, which was fantastic. I had the most amazing medical colleges and interns, and did all the work that I needed to do to become this child psychiatrist that I decided not to actually go and pursue and practice right away. And I went into healthcare administration, and I ran hospitals, and I built cancer centers, and I worked in multiple different avenues like recruitment and business relations, and I became an executive, and it was very exciting. And then through that process, when I became a mother, I decided that I wanted to take a break from healthcare. So I spent a lot of years in healthcare, a lot. And I was 18 years old so when I went into med school. So just recognize the fact that I was very young when I also went to med school. And I decided that I wanted to take a few months off, or maybe a couple years off, which ended up happening until my children turned about 2, 3 years old. And then I built a company that I recognized through my understanding of being a child expert and a psychiatrist and working with kids, that we were looking for something in our communities of educating our children about multiculturalism and also MESH, which is mental, emotional, social health. And there were not many products out there, and parents and teachers, and I had multiple people asking me for that. Through that process, I built this company called In KidZ, which is inclusive kids, that launched with multicultural lines, teaching not only children about other communities, but creating a place of belonging for them and really educationally doing it. And then bringing it into the schools. And now this year we're launching with our MESH line, which is our mental, emotional, social health line, through the phases of science, which is the first phase, the most important one. How do we talk about our feelings? And how do we do it starting as young as 3 years old, whether you're verbal or you're nonverbal? Through that process now of launching a company, I have been so humbled to be a speaker, a thought leader, a change maker within the youth experience, and also really taking that experience and saying, how do we listen to our kids? How do we listen to the next generation so we can actually create a future with them rather than for them?
Yeah, thanks for sharing your journey. I'm curious, because you've had a lot of different twists and turns in your career path, but it almost feels very cohesive and
Mhm.
consistent. Is there something about the mental health field that was attractive for you? Why mental health?
Well, we all have a story. All of us in this world have a story. Some story that will build who we are as an individual, build our character, build our own experiences, and then share that story. Well, I had a story. And the reason I wanted to go into mental health was because I think the story came from my childhood of things that I wasn't taught, how to deal with certain things that happened within my emotional traumas and places that I had to deal with. And also, I wasn't taught to my parents. They didn't know anything about this. They were like, just get over it, move on with your life, you know? So I think that was really the initiatives that took me to say that I want to not only work within the emotional wellness field, but I also want to work with kids because it's starting so young that if we can give you the tools and resources, by the time, Claire, they're your age and my age, they've actually succeeded then.
Yeah. What was really personal for me is when you were talking about your company and how you teach kids how to talk about their feelings. And one of the questions that was coming up for me is, well, if you haven't really been taught how to talk about your feelings in your childhood, I can reflect on my own childhood where so much of it was very strict. It was do what I say or
A
it's the
lot of us
highway.
were like that. Yeah.
So there wasn't much probing about, well, how do you feel about this? Right?
Yeah.
My feelings didn't didn't really matter.
Right. And therapy was not a real thing. Like, oh no, we don't go to therapy. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And so as I got older and as I stepped into career, I started to realize that one of the core skills that I was lacking was the ability to advocate for myself. It was the ability to be honest and real about how I'm feeling in this
Mhm.
situation or what my thought process is. I was in such a space where I was kind of expecting my management or my leaders to give me the directive and I
Right.
go and execute. And I thought that I would be judged by how well I was able to
Right.
fulfill on the promise.
Right.
And what I ended up learning is that so much of career progression and acceleration is about emotional intuition and how we perceive other people's emotions and
Hmm.
connect with them, but also how we can explain and describe and talk about what we're feeling in a situation
Right.
in a way that is tactful, right? In a way
Yeah.
that's meaningful. And so I'm curious as to if these are skills that maybe you weren't groomed with.
Hmm.
Stepping into career, what are some things that we can do to practice or to gain this skill?
So I want to start with first, what does everyone actually think mental health is, right? Before we touch on the fact how to do it, we have to understand what it is. And when we talk about the workforce, because you specifically said in the workforce, where your expectation was your leaders would see what you're going through, identify it, attack it, and say, okay, now let's work through this so we could be successful. Because the goal of a leader is what? If they're successful, is because their team is successful, right? They can't leaders can't do anything without their teams unless you're a solo leader. I mean, at this point, I've never seen a solo leader that could do such greatness without having multiple people helping them. Okay, so I use this analogy with children. So, we have a garden, right? There's gardens. And in our garden, we have flowers and we have trees and we have plants and every plant and tree and flower represents something, okay? In that, these are the different facets of emotional psychology, physical psychology, and social well-being. That is your community around you, your bosses, your employees, your teams. This garden within it, it's so dynamic. You as the individual have to understand first, where do you lie in that, right? What is your emotional well-being? What is your lack of emotional well-being, right? Where are you physiologically, psychologically, and socially? So let's imagine we're all walking through a garden, and under this ever-changing sky, we see a sun shining, and there's nourishing our plants and our garden and giving us all of this energy. And that is really the growth of you facilitating resilience. That sun coming on you is your resilience. So, other times when we're seeing this ever changing sky, right? This is how I explain to children. We see clouds and we see shadows and we see storms coming in. Those are your challenges. Those are all your challenges coming up. And that stability and vibrance of your garden is what you have to figure out how to keep. So that's your mind. In your mind, this is all happening. Now, mental health or emotional wellness, I like to call it with children, involves nurturing your garden through all these seasons. So you're tending to your weeds, that's your stress and anxiety. You're planting your seeds, those are your positive thoughts and behaviors. And you're cultivating a landscape, that's your balance and harmony. And in this garden, in every path that we go through, our thoughts, those are our thoughts, right? Those are open spaces to symbolize how we're being mindful and how we're present in the moments we're feeling. So now, even though there's a variety of things happening, the flora, the fauna, the diversity, oh my God, all these things are happening in your mind. We have to take each of those emotions and we have to represent them externally. Because if we internally keep them, guess what starts happening? The storms start brewing up. The streams start getting floated. Then what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're having coping mechanisms for all of these flows and adaptations that are coming through this garden. And that's when we know we have to start dealing with mental health. So first, let's focus on what it is. Okay? And I explain it like this because everyone's like, it's anxiety and depression. Well, these are big words. Like, honest to God, I don't think anybody knows what depression is until you go to a therapist, because there's so many divergence of depression and anxiety and OCD and ADHD. And all of this is physician words, medical words. These are all emotions and feelings that you guys have to get through. Now, how do we do this? So let's remove the weeds. We have to put thoughts in our mind, positive. Let's pull those weeds out. We have to water our garden. That's taking breaks, making sure we're doing little things to appreciate ourselves and bring presence to it. How do we equip this with ourselves? We need the tools. We have to be self-aware. We have to be compassionate. We have to be resilient. We have to have a support network. You have to have a support network. And when do we want to seek that sunlight? Well, we want to do it through therapy, through meditation, through exercise, through connection with others. And then we have to ensure that we're thriving. So in the essence of this, the essence of all of this is the journey is through your self-discovery, your growth, and then your healing. And each individual will create and cultivate their own unique garden in their own way. So while we're all striving to balance, we're all fostering, we all have to make sure that we're doing it personally for our own well-being and the ability to make sure we're weathering through these storms to consciously be there for ourselves. That's really how you have to cultivate it.
Yeah. I mean, so when I was listening, something that struck me as you were explaining the garden and you were talking about the sunlight being this resilience and then the clouds in the sky being these storms, these
Right.
challenges, and this idea that that can exist at the same time, right? And I think a lot of times we feel like when the storms and the clouds are coming, there's almost this breakdown of everything else. Of, well, it's so hard to be resilient. It's so hard to stand strong because there's this huge storm. And I have this fear of being able to weather it, of being able to get through it, of how do I approach this storm? Um
Right.
how do I navigate it to the end? But when we really reflect on it and we look at the garden and we look at it and we say, well, we're still resilient and we have all these other resources that are available to us, it
Yeah.
makes those challenges much more accessible and manageable.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said, and this really rang true for me, was this idea that terms like depression and anxiety are really big words. A lot of times we don't even know what they mean. And
Right.
I can say that was true for myself. So I remember having this anxious experience, but having no idea that what I was experiencing was anxiety until
Mhm.
I went to a mental health expert and they're like, yeah, you're suffering from anxiety. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, but having the words to describe that experience was so helpful for me
Mhm.
because what it allowed me to do was to kind of put a name to this experience that I was having,
Right.
and and kind of disengage my identity from the experience, because now I can name it, right? So
Right.
when my heart is beating really fast, or I'm feeling really anxious and nervous, my palms are
Right.
sweating. Okay, I know the experience I'm having right now is anxiousness, is anxiety. And so then when you talk about those coping mechanisms, then now I can say, well, I have this cognitive realization that what I'm physically experiencing in my body is anxiety. And now, because I have this cognitive connection, now I can also say, okay, well, I have some coping mechanisms for that. For me, those coping mechanisms were deep breathing.
Hmm.
So, for example, a lot of times, and I know people, one of the biggest fears, and I don't have a statistic for this, so definitely do your own research and correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the biggest fears is the fear of public speaking, right? And so that would happen for me, not on big stages, but in meetings where I was sitting with a group of my peers and I was expected to, present an update about what I was doing. I would get really anxious to the point where I would freeze up. It was difficult for me to even get the words out. And so one of the coping mechanisms that I learned for that was deep breathing. Is take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. And then I also learned kind of a 4-4-4 box method of breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you exhale for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds. And that was I was with that experience, I was able to regulate that anxiety and get back to a place of kind of a stable place where I was able to re-enter the conversation. And so I think it is really important for us to be able to name the experience. And a lot of times we go to these the easy ones. I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel happy. But as you were mentioning, within that there's actually a range of emotions. So when we talk about anxiety, that's only one step in a range of emotions that's related to fear. You have
Hmm.
trepidation, you have fear, you have
Right.
horror, you have anxiety. It's only one step in a range of emotions. So my question for you, Dr. Z, is for those of us who maybe are struggling with naming the emotions, how can we tap into that range of feelings that are available to us?
So are you asking me the range of feelings when you're going through a situation or through a emotional situation, or is it in general to find out if you have any emotional anxieties coming or emotional anything coming up?
In general. So, um, I guess where I'm getting at is there is so often where I didn't realize this, but I didn't realize that there were so many more emotions available to me than the ones that I was identifying with. Kind of the basic ones.
Right.
How do we
Happiness,
Yeah,
sad,
yeah.
crying, frustrated, angry. Those are your basic ones, right? How do we tap into more of that? So here's one of the lessons to learn in life is you have to sit with yourself. There's a lot of noise in our lives, lots of noise, lots of things, lots of people telling us actually how to act, how to think, how to interpret things. There's everyone, and social media doesn't help. TikTok doesn't help. YouTube doesn't help. I mean, I have nothing against these platforms, but if you want to know how you really feel, you need to sit with yourself. And I explained when all the emotions are coming to actually identify something's happening, you have to find another feed to come through it. So you're having a moment of really, really sadness. Where is that sadness coming from? Why is that sadness coming? Where is that sadness internally igniting your tears to come from, right? Those are things you have to feel and come through. I also, as a therapist, am just going to sit there and listen to you. And I will give you forwarding questions to let you find your thought process. Therapy isn't something where I'm like, Yeah, it definitely can be like, here's the thing, and I'm fix you. Fixing comes within ourselves. I'm giving you the tools and resources to help you fix yourself. The mind is fixed by us. Yes, there are certain medications that can help you close off some sort of things and to help regulate chemical imbalances and make sure you're there. But a lot of the work has to be done from us. I'd love to hear how many people just sit there and silence their mind. This is not a easy task to do. As a physician, I can tell you it's not even easy for me to do because I'm constantly on the go. I have children, I have work, I have businesses, I'm running around. But when I stop for a second, I'm like, clarity is also there for me. So when we want to tap into those, we've got to find that other thing to help us. So is it meditation? Is it journaling? Is it taking a walk? Is it reading a book? Is it listening to a podcast? Is it, listening to music? What are those things that are going to help you tap more into those? I actually had one time a young lady tell me listening to Taylor Swift songs actually lets her figure out how she's feeling the day. I am no one to judge that. But if that's how she figures out her emotions,
I love it.
I'm going to go with her, But that's just an avenue for her, right? That's just a little avenue for her. And it could be also a psychological avenue to say, hey, I want to feel joyful today. So I'm going to listen to this song. So it's not really that she's feeling that way. It's tapping into how to get her to feel that way. So that's really how we need to start tapping into what we want, is we need to take that time for ourselves. It really comes back to your self-assurance and your self-compassion.
Those are all really great. I can attest to once I started journaling and meditating more, it was really, really, really helpful. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it was, and you talked about this earlier, was really quieting the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes to mental health, for me, and with anxiety, I have all of these competing thoughts that are going on at the same time, and it's hard to sort out the voices of
Right.
what is worry, what is intuition,
Right.
like, and what is, what is harmful and what's helpful. And it's all happening at the same time, and it feels really overwhelming. And so the first step for me was really getting to a space where I could quiet my mind. And for me, that was in nature, where
Mm.
it was already naturally quiet. I've talked about this on the show before, but one of the other things that I practiced was listening to birds. And it sounds really simple, but how often do you walk around outside
Right.
and you don't even hear the birds chirping, but they're everywhere, you know? And so what I would do is when I would wake up in the morning or late at night, I would listen for birds and listen for that chirping, that voice, and acknowledge it. And the more that I did that, the more I was able to separate and create a separation of what's anxiety, what's intuition, and really hone in on that inner voice, but also acknowledging the inner child voice as well that's happening, right? Because
But I don't want to
go ahead,
interrupt you. But
go
that's
ahead.
the hard part, is the inner child voice.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing to tell someone who, first of all, everybody in the world has an inner child voice. Tell you guys all that. Y'all have it. What you've done is you've suppressed it because now you're an adult and you're not supposed to be a child anymore, which is true. I get that, because we're guiding generations to be adults. That's the goal. We're only a child technically, legally, for 18 years. We're adults for much longer than that. But that doesn't mean you can't, people say, oh, you become a child again when you have a kid. Not always. You don't really always have. And if you don't want kids, then what are you going to do? Never be a child again? We have created these spaces. Go jump in trampoline places. That's bringing your inner child out. Go rock climbing. That's bringing your inner child out. Hey, I like going to Dave and Buster's. Okay, I gotta admit that. I enjoy that. That brings my inner child. My kids are video game freakoids, but I don't like playing video games. I like just running around with them. My husband and I do the basketball tournament thing because I'm a basketball player. That brings my inner child out. And I remember the days when I used to play basketball, being like, oh man, I should have done this. I should have done that. But I also like playing the skee ball game that we used to play Chuck E. Cheese. That's like my favorite game. You have to go find your inner child. I think that's really what we are constantly missing. I know, Claire, you have, but it's not easy to find it because people have suppressed it so much, saying, I have to do this, 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 and this, and this to be this, 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 and this, and this. And I think the Gen Z and millennial generation is kind of letting go of those, but the workforce is telling us still to do it.
So let's talk about this. Why do you think conversations about mental health, even if those conversations are just with ourselves,
Right.
why are they so taboo? Why are people
Because
afraid
nobody
to?
wants to say that you have a psychological problem. If you have a psychological problem, then you're called crazy. Then are you taking drugs? Are you homeless? Is something like there's all these other societal things that come with that. We're constantly toxifying our bodies to calm our minds and our bodies. But really, we don't need to do that. Again, I have nothing against anyone having a glass of wine or doing what they need to do to just relax. But that doesn't need to be the control of your mind. Your mind's control is you, your heart, your emotions. It's a psychological, physiological, and social well-being. That's what we forget. But society tends to want to put on us labels. And that's where mental health or emotional wellness becomes a label. So I'm LGBTQ or whatever, I have a label. Why do I need a label? It is okay to be identified as something, but don't put a label so you put an issue on that person to say, hey, now they have a mental health issue. Now let's call them crazy or let's call them. That's what the problem is. That's why people don't want to deal with their own emotional wellness. I also don't like to call it mental health because, yes, that is a medical terminology. It's an emotional thing. It's a emotional, psychological, physiological, and societal thing that we have to, excuse me, not societal, social thing. This is all
This
well-being.
this is something that is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
I really want to put a pin in it
Sure.
because when we and so a lot of so when I talk about my own struggles with anxiety,
Right.
um I try to be really careful about how I express that. So instead of saying I'm a person, I have anxiety, I may
Yeah.
say something like, I struggle with anxiety, or I struggle with anxious feelings, or sometimes I have anxious feelings. And that word sometimes is so important because it's exactly kind of what you're saying. If I say I'm a person with anxiety, now all of a sudden I have not only
A
labeled
label.
myself,
Yeah.
but I've identified with that challenge. And now there's this idea that I have that I will always have anxiety and I will always be anxious. And that's not true.
No,
That
it's
is
not. So change your word from anxious to antsy. Change your word from anxiety to funny feelings. Change your words. Change the way you think of yourself before your expectation is somebody outside of your space will say it to you. One of the things I figure is I know I said we label people when we talk about mental health, and that's why it's not discussed, but we're labeling ourselves. So I'm dyslexic. It's all of a sudden dyslexia is coming out in like a big way. I'm dyslexic. I was diagnosed in 7th grade very unknowingly. I made the world till 7th grade. I didn't know how to read and write properly. People were like, how did she get through it? You make it happen. If you hustle it, it's part of the world that we all learn. You learn to do that. You learn to get through because I was like, I got to get through the next stage. I may be getting C's and D's and F's, but I'm going to pass to the next grade level. But then it was discovered, right? But that's a label that was put on me. I don't think I'm dyslexic anymore. I think I take dyslexia as I'm actually really smart. I do beyond what I want to do. I have created every career and opportunity for myself because I have a really high IQ. Don't put me in a box. I am going to advance myself outside that box. But that's me doing it. That's me taking my challenges and changing them. So your anxiety is your label. Change your label. I have an antsy moment. I'm feeling uncomfortable. Remove the word.
I was getting chills when you were talking because when I've talked to young professionals, something that comes up in our conversations often is if I'm going into a job interview,
Mm-hmm.
how do I talk about my dyslexia?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do I talk about the fact that I'm struggling in this area? And once I get this job, I'm afraid that I'm not going to do well because I struggle with dyslexia or I struggle with anxiety or whatever it is. And it becomes something that actually holds people back from taking the action to move forward.
Yeah.
Because there's this fear of, well, one, how do I talk about it? If I talk about it, maybe I won't get the job. If I do get the job, what if people at work find out? If people at work find out, what if I'm just not doing well? Right.
Yeah, and
And
that's a
so,
true feeling. Right. And I don't disregard that. I'm agreeing with you that that's a real feeling, but that's in us. And there will be people who are going to say that to you. I just had this experience recently. I had someone email me and say, "Oh, do you know her name is spelled with an A? Oh, you added an N." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. That's my dyslexia." I first have to remember I need to stop apologizing. That's my dyslexia. Somebody will make a random comment to me saying, "Oh, I didn't take it offensively." Yeah, but I took your thing offensively. You need to understand that I have dyslexia and that's a real thing. Okay? It's not a joke. It's not in my mind, my words and letters have to slowly happen. If I work fast, it doesn't happen. That's why in school and in medical school, it took me longer to do my work. But where I am today, I'm just letting you know that I am dyslexic and that's what happened. You making a comment to me like I didn't get offended, that's not my problem. That's not my issue that you didn't get. I don't really care. But you're being rude now by making a joke of it. I walk away because you know what? My power is in me, not them.
man, and something I always say is, well, if revealing that you're having this challenge
That's the power.
or yeah, like
That's the power. You revealed, I
mm,
have this. You don't understand it, but you haven't recognized it and you're still doing what you're doing. And this is a really bad analogy. It's just like racism. You're putting me in a box because I'm South Asian and I have to be a doctor or a mathematician or a scientist. Well, now I'm a speaker and thought leader and change maker. I don't have to be like all the rest of the South Asians in the world. But you put me in this box of telling me, why aren't you wearing a little red dot on your head? Why don't you have an accent and all this? That's your issue, not mine. And secondly, my dyslexia or my anxiety that I have now identified to you, and you're still creating it, is you have the problem. And guess what? Clinically, I can report you, but I won't. Career-wise, I can report you, but I will. I am going to show you how you have taken that situation, and I'm going to succeed out of it.
thank you for that. There are so many people that will get value out of this
I
conversation.
hope
I am
so.
telling you.
I hope so.
Um, so when faced with a situation where a young professional, maybe they're going into an interview and they want to reveal this part of their experience,
Yeah.
what tips do you have of how to open up that conversation? Is it appropriate to talk about it in an interview
I
when
It depends on the job you're going for. I got to be really honest with you. Like I can't define anything of that. So now if someone came and I was doing an interview, I was bringing an artist or a creative or maybe even a marketer or someone in, I actually would think it's an awesome thing because I want to see how they tackled their challenges to make them more successful. I actually have to tell you, leaders like that, to say you've overcome this challenge. So it could be in a storyline. So a lot of the questions will tell us something personal about yourself, right? And so for me, let's say I'm doing an interview, mine would be, this is my story and this is what has challenged me to become who I am today. I mean, if you guys one day when, I actually tell my story, every career I've had, I've created for myself. And this started from middle school because remember, I wasn't diagnosed till 7th grade. That's 13 years old. That's a long period of not knowing how to read and write. So I had to navigate that. And that took me to a place of like, oh, wait, I could build a career like this. I could go pivot to this. I could do this. But that was my story. So when you're in an interview, one of the things I can say is they're all going to ask you, tell us something personal about yourself. Is there something you'd like to share with us? They're going to want to know who you are as a person, because that's going to also develop who they are bringing into their company. And that's the time to tell them this. I dealt with this. This was a mental health thing. This was an emotional wellness thing. Was a family thing. This was a trauma thing. This was whatever it was, to show them that you have overcome it, succeeded at it, and done so well that you're resilient and you can become successful through something. That will show them that any challenge you get, you will come through it. So that's where you can actually say that in an interview process.
That is excellent. Um, I love that. The power is in the storytelling. And
Yes.
this is something we have to remember, is that our narrative is our own, right?
Mhm.
And the way that we tell our story is totally and completely up to us.
Yeah.
And so we can reclaim that power in the story.
Yeah.
And as you're saying so beautifully, is now that story becomes our power and it shows how we are resilient, right?
Yeah.
And it goes back to the garden, right?
Yes. It goes back to the
It
garden.
goes
You're
back to the
perfect.
garden,
What a metaphor to compare. Like, well, that was great. Yeah. No, you're
full
right.
circle.
Oh, that is a perfect venue to back to the garden. You're so
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
The power's in us, and we keep forgetting that. We keep giving our power to other people. That's the biggest challenge that we have to ever overcome as a generation. I think, what am I, Y or X? I don't even know what generation I am anymore. But the millennial generation of youths, the Gen Z, they're seeing that, but they still haven't overcome it. And my goal is with the Generation Alpha that is now young, in the young youth, is for them to see that, and now from the ages of 4, 5, 6 years old, to actually build that. So when they're in their 40s, it's part of life. It's an easy thing. But if we teach it to your generation and the generation behind you or the generation in front of you, they'll give it to that next generation.
How can we share this knowledge? But
Oh,
we have it for ourselves. How do we share it? How do we spread it? How do
talk to
we open
everybody.
up more conversations?
Talk, bring community into your conversations. If you see someone who's struggling with something, have a sit down with them. Ask them how they're doing. Be kind, be compassionate. You know, if you know your friend hasn't said something and you're seeing something, trust your gut. Sometimes they won't open up. Try again. Try again and again. Send a text. Hey, I haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything good? Say hi to someone on the road, because you don't know what kind of day they had. That may just turn their day around. Teach your children to be kind to one another, because that doesn't cost a thing. There's no money involved in that. Compassion, empathy, being nice, apologizing for the mistakes they've made if they've said something wrong to another child or an adult or a youth. It's not going to hurt you. It'll only balance the fact that you're actually a much better person. Ego's a really hard thing, and that's a whole different conversation. But that's probably the biggest torment for our emotional wellness for others is our egos.
Oh man. What you just said right there really reached deep. And I'm thinking about my relationships. I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's true. I think my ego has definitely held me back from reaching out or
Mhm.
connecting, or taking the steps to keep reaching out, even because I have this fear of abandonment and of rejection. And
Mhm.
so
I get that.
it's hard to just be persistent, even if
Yeah.
that is what's required or what's needed. um so that really hit home, hit deep. The other thing that I learned through my own journey with mental health is when you're compassionate with yourself, you begin to give yourself permission to be compassionate with other people. So a lot of times the way you treat others is a
Yeah.
reflection of actually your own
How you
self-talk.
treat, yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah. And so I had to learn that of when I look at how I judge people or how I see people,
Mhm.
taking a moment and pausing and saying, man, is this how I see myself? Is this how I judge myself? Is this how I talk to myself? And correcting that.
Right.
Um, So yeah. Well, we're here near the end of the conversation. It went by
Yeah.
fast, right?
I know. I was like, wait, it's already like 4:30. Oh, well, yeah, our timing, my timing. Yeah. Like, wow. No,
Yeah.
this was great. I really appreciate this. I hope I've inspired, or anyone has any questions, they can reach out to me. I'm on Instagram at Dr. Z underscore MD. Definitely DM me. I'm also on TikTok. I guess I'm also on Twitter. I'm on all those social, but it's all the same. Dr. Z, and it's Dr. Z, DRZE underscore MD. And I'm here. We're trying to all do this together. This is not a one person fight. There's many of us who need help. And we all need to do this as a community, and society will change if we do it, one person at a time.
Yeah. Uh, are there any resources that you would recommend for young professionals to tap into?
Yeah. So for meditation wise, I have to say there's all these amazing apps out there. There's Insight Timer. If you're like just starting out, um, journaling, guys, you don't need to go get fancy books. Just get a book. Just sit down and write. And just sit down and write how just sit. Just take a minute. I would say start 5 minutes in a day. You don't even need that long. Meditationally do 5 minutes, journaling do 5 minutes. Um, Other resources out there, like honestly, I think there's some amazing books out there. I know this is a big name, but Joe Dispenza has a great, Gabor Mate he's a great, these are great people who have great books out there, and they're audiobooks, but they really give you steps to how to clear your mind and how to do that pieces. I'm on Instagram. I know I'm really working towards the kids space, but you can use that in your own space. Trust me, it works. Um, those are, I think, your first few steps and resources for people who want to just really start in that space of mental health and emotional wellness. Reach out to people. If you have somebody that you can talk to, reach out. Don't stop. Someone's going through something, whether it's depression, anxiety, or any of these emotional wellness types of abilities, or if you're feeling very, very low and suicidal, please reach out to someone. And anyone who's being reached out to, take a minute to stop. Take a minute to stop, because that person needs you. It's a very scary place if they don't have someone to talk to.
Thank you for that. Well, we are here at the end. And so I want to give us an opportunity to reveal where we are. I'm going to guess that you're in LA.
Of course, I'm in LA. The Palm Springs gave it away. If it wasn't that, it'd be Palm Springs. There's not much in LA. I thought the smog would give it away.
I think it was the smog or the half alive palm trees.
Yeah, right. Half alive now, because yeah, there's no such thing as global warming, guys. There's no such
Yeah.
thing. Right now, to tell you the truth, LA is very cold, which is just not normal for us. We're rainy, we're cold, and our spring and winters have been really weird the last 2 years, but
Yeah.
it's a space
Yeah.
we're in.
And then for our listeners, I'm just going to describe what I'm seeing. So there's the LA skyline. There's some trees in the foreground. It's definitely quite a bit of smog. It looks like the sun is setting, but
It's
it's
a
kind of
sunset. It's one of my favorite things in LA. It's either the sunrise is my
yeah.
favorite in LA or it's the sunset. Through the day, I don't really walk away at anything in LA.
Well, I am here in Chicago.
I can see
Actually,
that.
yeah, yeah. So this is
Cold.
it is cold. This is just taken a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And there is ice. I'm going to try to swing around so you can kind of see, but there is ice on the ground. There, that's my pup. That's my dog.
Aw.
So I tell this story quite a bit, but when I left corporate America back in 2019, I was living in Northern California, and I left during the pandemic. I came home. I couldn't bring my dog because couldn't live at home with mom.
Aw.
So my friend fostered him, and just this past August, it was 3 years that we were separated, and this past August I was able to bring him home.
Oh, is he
So
happy to see you?
oh yeah, so happy to be home.
Oh,
And this is where I walk every single day.
it's amazing.
I walk this path. This is actually the beach. There was ice on the ground at this time, but this is where I go to meditate and clear my mind and
It's
breathe
great.
and get grounded and center myself.
Right.
And so I encourage anyone who's watching to find your space, find your happy place.
Find your happy place. Mhm.
Yeah, and even if you can't go there physically, you can go there in meditation, and so,
You can.
uh, yeah. Well, Dr. Z, thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Anything else that you wanted to add before we hop off?
Take a breath every day, everyone.
Yeah,
Just breathe. That's
and with that
it.
and with that, we are out.
All right.
See you guys.